In this video, I'm going to be responding to Joe Rogan, who has recently expressed vile amounts of ignorance on the UFO subject. All right. You are now in the presence of UFO Jesus, Mr. Rogan. You have transgressed me. The following clip is taken from the Joe Rogan Experience, episode 959, with Mick West. All the episodes will be linked below. Roll it.
But there's nothing. That's the craziest thing. Like, the more I talked to these people, the more I went over all their evidence, air quotes evidence, the more I asked them why they believe things. There is nothing. There's not a goddamn thing that you can put on a scale. There's not a thing that you can weigh. There's not a thing that you can measure. There's not a thing that you can look at a photo and go, wow, that's compelling. There's not one. It's just an idea. And that idea is that there's something in the sky that flies around that we, either might catch if you're there, the right place, the right time, or not, and that they're from another planet.
The first thing I'm going to do is a psychological analysis of why Joe Rogan is so ridiculously dismissive of a subject, a UFO subject, that actually has copious amounts of evidence supporting and verifying its reality. I'll name a few. Photographic evidence, ground traces, radar evidence happening in conjunction with eyewitnesses seeing what's on the radar, aircraft equipment malfunctioning when it's in the presence of UFOs, and even time perception being altered by people who get close to the UFO phenomenon. All of this has been verified many, many times. So the first reason Mr. Rogan is unjustifiably dismissive of the UFO phenomenon is because back in 2013 on the Sci-Fi Channel, he did a show called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. And he interviewed a lot of conspiratorial kind of people, and he did not find these people's attitudes appealing, and he does not want to be associated with those kind of people. But of course, that is a miscalculation on his part, because you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sure, there's a lot of crackpot conspiracy theories. One that comes to mind immediately is the Earth is flat and it's not round. But the UFO subject stands on its own. And you, Mr. Rogan, should have the sophistication to be able to distinguish between a conspiracy theory that doesn't have the evidence to support it and one that overwhelmingly does, sir. The second reason Joe Rogan dismisses the UFO phenomenon is because he has done a lot of interviews with, I believe, Michael Shermer, definitely Mick West, definitely Howard Bloom, and others who have expressed their unjustifiable skeptical attitude of the UFO phenomenon. And in his mind, Mr. Rogan's like, well, they're really smart dudes. And if they're really smart, educated, hell, they're more educated than I am. They're smarter than I am. This is what Mr. Rogan is saying. So if they're smarter than me and more educated than me, and they doubt the UFO phenomenon, why would I be in conflict with their assessment? Another miscalculation that Mr. Rogan is engaging in. Mr. Rogan, people have blind spots. People have confirmation bias. You like to harp on how conspiracy theorists have a lot of confirmation bias. But what you ignore is that debunkers can also fall victim to that very same confirmation bias. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Mick West, Michael Shermer, let's add Neil deGrasse Tyson to that list, and so forth. Definitely Sarah Scholes. Hi, Sarah. You're lovely. These people definitely have fallen victim to confirmation bias. They see what they want to see. They dismiss the evidence regardless of how compelling it is, because they've already made up their mind that this just can't be. There can't be metallic objects coming into our airspace that are not from any military inventory in the world. Well, Mr. Rogan, you need to be more sophisticated, because just because they're really smart and they score well on an IQ test and they're very articulate doesn't equate to them being correct about the UFO phenomenon. The third reason Mr. Rogan has rejected the UFO phenomenon as being reality, which it is probably because he has a shallow grasp of it. Has he even read a single book on the subject? I don't know. So people who haven't really looked into it oftentimes have the strongest opinion that it is bunk and that it is false. And this is the third reason Mr. Rogan is unjustifiably dismissive of the subject. The following is a quote from Leslie Kane's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. Why is there such a strong taboo against taking the subject seriously, UFOs, when there's so much evidence for it? If you want a more in-depth explanation as to why that is, you're going to have to buy her book. But I'm going to provide you with a very truncated version of why there is so much taboo regarding the acceptance of the reality of UFOs that visit, one way or the other, our planet. Back in the late 40s, US officials were faced with a problem. There was an influx of UFO sightings, many of which were witnessed by highly credible witnesses such as pilots and even military pilots. There was later a top secret report by the Air Force called Estimate of the Situation, in which the data from convincing cases of UFO sightings was looked at very methodically, and the hypothesis was from the Air Force that these UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin. There were so many sightings at around this time that communication channels were getting saturated, and the Air Force was starting to see this situation as a threat to national security. One thing they were concerned about is that the Soviets could stage a UFO wave, get all of the communication channels saturated, catching the Air Force off guard, and then attack the United States. To combat this problem that the Air Force was having, there was a group put together called the Robertson Panel. And the task of the Robertson Panel, which was a panel of many scientists, was to encourage the various intelligence services to influence the media and to influence civilian groups studying UFOs, and to try to change the perception of UFOs by diminishing the credibility of UFOs and debunking UFOs. They wanted to alter public perception, make the topic, the subject matter, one of ridicule that has rippled out unto this day. The efforts of the Central Intelligence Agency and all other adjacent intelligence services, we are feeling those impacts up until today, and they have never, in my opinion, I don't know if I can verify it, but it's certainly, the Robertson Panel can be verified, they have never let up on their commitment to keep the UFO subject one of ridicule. And that is one of the key ways that the government has been able to keep this subject from getting the proper attention and scientific assessment and study that it so clearly deserves. The first UFO sighting I'm going to share with you is an ideal segue from what we just discussed regarding how and why the US government created propaganda to take public perception of what it used to be in the early stages. Public perception was, wow, UFOs are real, there's something to it. Transferring that public perception to, you are a crazy Looney Tune if you buy into the proposition that UFOs are real and could be of extraterrestrial origin. The first sighting I'm going to talk about is the incursion at O'Hare Airport in 2006. For about 5 minutes, a disc-shaped object hovered quietly above United Airlines terminal and then subsequently zoomed up into a cloud bank, leaving a cookie-cutter hole in its wake. This was all witnessed by pilots, managers, and mechanics, and they independently witnessed the same exact object. At first, United Airlines, as well as the FAA, denied having any information on this incident. But later, the FAA released a tape of a United supervisor's call to the air traffic control tower talking about this object, and then both the United Airlines and the FAA had to reluctantly acknowledge that they do have information on this incident. Initially, an FAA spokesperson tried to explain away the incident as airport lights reflecting off the cloud ceiling. The problem, however, is that this event took place in the daytime and such lights were not even turned on. In a second try, a different spokesperson tried to write off this event as nothing more than a weather phenomenon. Obviously, however, the United employees and airline pilots, seeing the object from various vantage points, would be able to discern between a weather phenomenon and an object that's metallic. Finally, an FAA official conveyed that his best guess is that what everyone witnessed was a weather phenomenon known as a hole-punched cloud, and what everyone was actually seeing was the blue of the sky through a hole in the clouds, and they were mistaking that for a hovering saucer that's metallic. Now, obviously, it is absolutely absurd to put forth that a bunch of United airline pilots and employees would mistake a hole in the cloud and seeing through that hole the blue of the sky for a metallic looking color hovering disc. Be that as it may, the problem with the hole cut that was being put forth, that hypothesis that was being put forth by the FAA official, is such a weather phenomenon can only occur in very cold weather. But that day, it was actually too warm for the cited weather phenomenon to actually take place. So after all of this, the FAA decided not to investigate a hovering metallic object staying stationary for at least 5 minutes and ultimately zooming upward at high velocity, and in the process of doing so, leaving a cookie-cutter hole in the clouds. Sadly, the highly credible aviation witnesses to the O'Hare hovering disc decided to remain anonymous for fear of their job security being compromised. So the question arises, how does this 2006 O'Hare UFO event have a connection with what took place in the late 40s with the Robertson Panel that was put together by the Air Force to encourage intelligence agencies to infiltrate the media and to infiltrate civilian groups that study UFOs and to debunk and to ridicule the UFO subject? What occurred in 2006 have to do with what happened back in the late 40s? And the answer to that question is, it has everything to do with it. The way that the O'Hare event was handled, where it wasn't investigated by the FAA, which of course it should have been, it's extremely dangerous for a metallic object hovering for at least 5 minutes at a busy airport. Obviously, such a thing should be investigated for nothing more than to protect the planes that go in and out of that busy airport day in and day out. But the reason it wasn't investigated, the reason the pilots decided to remain anonymous for fear of losing their job security, and the reason that the FAA officials kept coming up with utter BS to explain away the event. In fact, in the very beginning, they lied and said they had no knowledge of the incident. The reason this occurred is because of the government propaganda initiated back in the 40s that we are still feeling the effects of in 2018, although it's diminishing significantly recently. The next UFO sighting is the 1976 Tehran UFO event. Just like the 2006 O'Hare UFO incident, the 1976 Tehran UFO incident had an amazing amount of witnesses and probably a lot more than what occurred at O'Hare. At 11 p.m., September 18th, 1976, citizens were frightened by an object at around 6,000 feet altitude circling over the city. After receiving 4 calls, an employee at the air traffic control tower finally went outside with his binoculars, looked up, and also himself made contact visually with the object. The decision was made for an F-4 to be scrambled for a UAP intercept. The first jet failed to get very close to the object because the object was moving at such high rates of speed. But when the F-4 did get closer to the object, all the instrumentation went out and there was the pilot was no longer able to communicate with the air traffic control tower. The determination was made for an additional F-4 to be scrambled to intercept the UAP. Now, this is a mind trip. This object was flashing with an intense red, green, orange, and blue lights, so bright that you could not see the object itself. The only thing you could see was the light emanating from the object. It was reported that this sequence of flashing happened so rapidly, it was like a strobe light. Beyond that, these flashing lights formed the shape of a diamond. When the second F-4 was close enough to the object to harness its weapons, the weapons jammed and the radio communications became garbled. The pilot of the second F-4 is a general named Parviz Jafari. Now, here's the second mind trip I want to share with you. General Jafari noticed an object coming out of the primary object that looked like something like a bright lit moon, and it was coming at his aircraft at high rates of speed, almost like a missile. Jafari took evasive actions and was able to evade that bizarre bright lit moon ball, whatever it was, that came out of the primary diamond-shaped object. Now, this probably went over a lot of your heads, but in actuality, Commander David Fravor, back in 2004, he witnessed small objects coming out of the Tic Tac UFO. Roll it.
Well, you can't really discern what it is until there's a couple of shots. When it gets close, there's a couple of objects coming out of the bottom.
There's a couple of objects coming out of the bottom. Now that's some cray-cray stuff right there. I can't help but examine the experiences, the experience of David Fravor and the experience of General Parviz Jafari, and look at the vehicles that are interacting with the pilots and say, these vehicles, whoever is behind them, whoever is piloting them, has a tremendously healthy sense of humor. I mean, what is occurring in these instances is highly dramatic, highly theatrical. I mean, yeah, the 1976 Tehran event is even more theatrical than the event that David Fravor experienced, but may I remind you that when David Fravor was told at the end of his experience in 2004 to go to the rendezvous point, guess what? The UAP got there before he could. And the guy on the USS Princeton control tower got on the communication band and said to David Fravor, "You're not going to believe this, but where you're supposed to be, it is already there." Do you see what I'm getting at? Whatever is behind this phenomenon is very theatrical, very dramatic. What an amazing sense of humor. Now, I heard Grant Cameron a while back, I believe it was Grant Cameron, on Linda Moulton Howe's show. And he said something very interesting. He said, look at the Tic Tac UFO. Now, the reason the Tic Tac UFO is all flamboyant, is flying all around, doing all kinds of maneuvers, making David Fravor chase him and not ever getting a lock and so forth, is because whatever is behind this phenomenon wants these experiences to be leaked. I'm going to say it again. Leaked. If these UFOs were just to be, 1,000 yards off, quietly watching an aircraft carrier or something of that nature, the stories would be much less likely to be leaked to the public. But beyond that, even though David Fravor only encountered one of these Tic Tac UFOs, a week prior to David Fravor intercepting the Tic Tac UFO, a week prior to that, the USS Princeton has been detecting multiple Tic Tac UFOs. They started to detect them at the radar ceiling of 60,000 feet. The radar signatures would show that they dropped to about 50 feet, hovered there, and then they would shoot back up at hypersonic speeds. Why were they doing this? Now, maybe I'm anthropomorphizing, but one interpretation is they're trying to be dramatic again by doing something very dramatic, dropping from 60,000 feet to 50 feet and then going back up into the highest regions of the atmosphere is pretty dramatic because they want to put on a show. They want to have a psychological impact so that ultimately the story is more likely to leak out into the public. So what I'm trying to tell you is whatever is behind this phenomenon, I still lean toward extraterrestrial, but whatever it is, it appears that part of the plan is to be so ridiculously flamboyant and theatrical so that these stories cannot be contained. I want to demonstrate to you how duplicitous the US government is when it comes to the subject matter of the UFO phenomenon. When the US Air Force is questioned about UFOs, they have a prepared form letter that they call a fact sheet that they read out to people questioning the Air Force about the UFO phenomenon, and this is essentially the same thing they have uttered since the close of Project Blue Book back in 1969. So when the Air Force is asked about UFOs, this is what they say. The US government will no longer be investigating UFOs for the following reasons. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. There has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. There has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Now, that's what they say publicly. But allow me to show you how they do things privately. First thing in the morning after the September 18th, 1976 UFO incident over Tehran, General Parviz Jafari went to the headquarters to report what exactly occurred, and all the generals were present at the meeting, but there was another guy who was present named Colonel Olin Moy, a U.S. Air Force officer with the U.S. Military Advisor and Assistance Group posted in Tehran. U.S. Colonel Moy took notes during the debriefing. Later, a once classified memo from the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, written by Lieutenant Colonel Moy, who was present at the debriefing in Tehran the morning after the 1976 UFO event, he wrote an in-depth memo over 3 pages long detailing what occurred. And the reason this document has gotten into public hands is because it was requested using the Freedom of Information Act. This report, written by Colonel Moy, was sent to the NSA, to the White House, and as well to the CIA. Another document dated October 12, 1976 by Major Colonel Roland Evans provided an assessment of the case for the DIA. It said that, quote, "This case is a classic which meets all the criteria necessary for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon." The following is an excerpt from Leslie Kane's book titled UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. A link to that amazing book is in the description. To make that point, Evans listed some important facts in his DIA document. There were multiple highly credible witnesses to the objects from different locations. The objects were confirmed on radar. The loss of all instruments happened on 3 separate aircraft, a commercial jet as well as our 2 F-4s, and an inordinate amount of maneuverability was displayed by the UFOs. The evaluation form said that the reliability of the information was confirmed by other sources and the value of the information was high. It said the information would be potentially useful. This shows the US government took this information very seriously, and it was clear to me at the time that this information was being kept secret there. So yeah, the bottom line here is that the CIA, the NSA, and of course the Air Force all are interested in UFOs. They all study UFOs, and they've been doing so since day one, late in the 40s. Now, why would they do that? Because guess what? If you are fully aware of a phenomenon that can do circles around your most sophisticated military weapon platforms, it can bypass any encryption used on communication bands. They have the capability of altering human perception of time, and at will, they can turn off an aircraft's instrumentation as well as disable their ability to communicate with the control tower. And beyond that, they are capable of turning nuclear missiles deep underground within missile silos offline. Yeah, I'm pretty confident, just a little, that the US government is interested in a phenomenon capable of such feats. I'm also pretty confident that the United States would love to be able to duplicate those capabilities for obvious reasons. Mr. Rogan, you have recently made a series of comments about the UFO phenomenon, claiming there is no good evidence to substantiate the belief in the phenomenon. And that is why many of your fans have been calling you out in the comments section of your YouTube channel, because they are upset with you, because they know how wrong you are about that. So I have a series of questions for you, Mr. Rogan. Do you believe that a bunch of United pilots, managers, and mechanics would mistake a hole-punched cloud for a hovering metallic disc? Bear in mind that the various pilots, managers, and mechanics saw the object from various vantage points. Knowing this, do you actually believe that the FAA's claim that their best guess is that it was a weather phenomenon called a hole-punched cloud? Do you believe that all of those credible employees would see a hole-punched cloud but perceive it as a hovering metallic disc? Do you believe that? Finally, do you have any children? I don't know if you do, but hopefully you have like a toddler in your home. What I want you to do, Mr. Rogan, I want you to approach your toddler, and I want you to look for the best hole-punched cloud picture you possibly can. Ask your toddler, what does this look like, dear? You know what your toddler's gonna say? He's gonna say this, Daddy, it looks like a hole in the cloud. He's not going to say, Daddy, it looks like a flying metallic disc that's hovering. My second question for you, Mr. Rogan, is do you believe that what occurred in Tehran, September 18th, 1976, the UFO event, do you believe that what the general saw on the ground was Jupiter and chose to scramble two F-4 fighters over seeing Jupiter in the sky? That's what Brian Dunning suggests of Skeptoid.com. He also suggests that when General Parviz Jafari got airborne and pursued the object, pursued Jupiter apparently, that Jupiter was at least part of what he was seeing, yet what he saw, the details of what he saw consisted of alternating strobes of blue, green, red, and orange. So what I have to say is, the only way he would mistake Jupiter for that description is if he took mushrooms prior to getting into the cockpit of the F-4. The third question I have for you, Mr. Rogan, is do you believe that the projectile reported being witnessed by General Parviz Jafari, that what he was really seeing was the outcome of a meteor shower? Lastly, Mr. Rogan, do you believe the malfunctioning of the instrumentation of General Parviz Jafari's aircraft was a coincidence and had nothing to do with what he reported, that when he got close to the object, that's when it malfunctioned, and when he got further away from it, all of the equipment returned to normal? Do you think that when he got close to the object, that his equipment just happened to come to go offline, and that when he got further away, another coincidence ensued and his equipment started working again? Is that what you believe regarding the 1976 UFO event over Tehran? Now, I don't know what General Parviz, and I know I've been butchering his name, Parviz Jafari encountered on the night of September 18th and 19th, 1976 over Tehran, Iran. But what I can tell you is that it wasn't just witnessed by him, it was witnessed by a plethora of people, including his navigator, including another F-4 pilot and navigator. And The explanation or the suggestion that skeptic Brian Dunning gives of what ensued is every bit as ridiculous as the explanation or the suggestion that the FAA official gave of what occurred in 2006 over O'Hare, that a bunch of engineers, mechanics, and United Airline pilots from various vantage points, what they actually saw was not what they said they saw, which was a metallic disc, but they saw a whole cut cloud. That suggestion is every bit as absurd as the suggestion that the skeptic Brian Dunning makes of what occurred over Tehran in 1976. The thing about the UFO phenomenon that so many debunkers ignore is that there are piles and piles of incidents that have occurred throughout the decades that we know of. We probably don't know of anywhere close to most of them. And the details of the experiences line up very consistently, such as you get close to the object and you're about to fire off a missile and your avionics gets jammed and goes out. In fact, even Commander David Fravor, when he encountered the Tic Tac UFO in 2004, he revealed that his radar system went out as a result of encountering that Tic Tac UFO. And please recognize he was flying an F-18 Hornet, one of the most premier jets in the world with one of the most premier avionics in the world. It's a big deal that his radar got jammed as he got close to the mystery Tic Tac UFO object.
And it's moving around left, right, forward, back. The radar immediately starts getting jammed.
Mr. Rogan, I know you're watching this because I am UFO Jesus, and I have one request. Please get Jeremy Corbell on your show. He's the preeminent expert on the Nimitz incident that happened in 2004, and as you know, that's been the talk of the town because of the December 16th article that was released in the New York Times, because of the subsequent gun camera footage that has come out most recently in March. You need to get an expert that's highly objective and highly knowledgeable about the subject matter post December 16th. Subscribe to my channel, y'all. And if you'd like to support my channel, you could buy some merch. Link is in the description. Or you could even become a patron. Thank you so much. My camera battery is about to run out. I love you so much. See you in the next episode.